Well, hi, everybody. I'm Don Stewart, and welcome to another edition of Breaking News for this Monday, the 15th day of July, 2024. And a couple of major events have taken place since we last talked to you. Number one, J.D. Vance from Ohio has been chosen as Donald Trump's VP, his running mate for the election this November, and the Republican convention, which is now underway, has already voted Donald Trump to receive the nomination for his party for President of the United States. All right, in this edition of Breaking News, we're going to do something a little bit different. We're going to consider the miraculous escape from death of President Trump in light of what the Bible has to say about what we call God's divine appointments. We will not only find examples of this in Scripture, we'll also consider a number of simple historical examples, historical events that have set the stage for the rebirth of the state of Israel, which of course sets the stage for the fulfillment of prophecies the Scripture gives concerning the last days. We think you're going to find this very enlightening. So let's look at the events just of a couple of days ago on Saturday. Donald Trump miraculously survived an attempt on his life. It was only because he just happened to turn to his right and look up at that split second, to look up at the monitor, which is something he had to read off of. So he said he never turns to the right, but he had to do that at that split second to look, turn, and then to read something by looking up. In doing so, it literally saved his life because, as we know, his life was spared. If he had not turned, he would have been killed. The bullet would have hit him straight on, and he would have died. One can only imagine the aftermath that would have resulted, and history would have looked so much different. Now, this is an example of what we call the supernatural working in the natural realm. It's a biblical principle that we all should be made aware of. Now, I've written a book called God's Divine Appointments, the supernatural working of God through everyday events, the stories of Joseph, Judah, and Jonah. It can be found on our website, Educating Our World, under the heading of Christian Living. Now, at the beginning of the book, I give this explanation of what we're talking about. There are a number of divine appointments in each of these three narratives. Divine appointments, as we define them, are the supernatural workings of God through simple, everyday events. In other words, there are a number of seemingly unrelated incidents that, when eventually connected, reveal the plan of an all-knowing, all-powerful God, a God who is supernaturally working his will by means of ordinary circumstances or ordinary occurrences. Put another way, it is the supernatural working through the natural. As was true in the lives of these biblical characters, the Lord himself is working in the same way in the lives of believers today. Seemingly unrelated events, which on their own do not appear to be important, but are all part of a greater plan of the Lord. They will eventually begin to make sense to us when we're able to connect the dots. Now, we're going to look at an example of the divine appointments in the life of the patriarch Joseph. And if you recall the story, Jacob, his father, asked Joseph to check on his brothers who were grazing their flocks in the area of Shechem. As a faithful son, he obeyed his father and set out for Shechem. There was no quarreling or expectation of some entitlement on the part of Joseph. He just simply obeyed. Now, we're going to see 9 distinct divine appointments in his life now. Divine appointment number 1. The brothers were not in Shechem because it was not good for grazing. There was no grass there. So there would be no meeting up of the brothers with Joseph at this destination. Divine appointment number 2. An unnamed man who was in Shechem just happened to overhear them saying they were going to Dothan. So Joseph went to Dothan, some 17 miles away. When he reached Dothan, his brothers plotted to immediately kill him. Reuben intervened so that they did not slaughter him on the spot. Instead, they stripped him off of his clothes, threw him into a pit without food or water. It looked like he would surely die of starvation, thirst, and exposure. Indeed, there was nobody there to help him. When we now come to divine appointment number 3. While Joseph was in the pit in Dothan, a caravan that was headed for Egypt just happened to be passing by at the time. Divine appointment number 4. Dothan was on the caravan route. Shechem was not. So this episode could never have happened this way if they were grazing where they originally intended to be. In other words, if there was grass in Shechem and this took place at that place, this was not on the caravan route. None of the events could have taken place. All right. Divine appointment number 5. Judah, seeing the caravan, suggested selling Joseph into slavery. The brothers minus Reuben agreed, and Joseph was sold to these traders who were on their way to Egypt. Divine appointment number 6. In Egypt, Joseph was sold to Potiphar, the captain of the Pharaoh's guard. Divine appointment number 7. When Potiphar's wife falsely accused Joseph of attempting to rape her, he was placed in the royal prison for the crime in which he was accused of but did not commit. Divine appointment number 8. In the royal prison, due to his desire to be the best prisoner possible, he was given the job of looking after the incoming prisoners. In divine appointment number 9, he was put in charge of 2 prisoners in the court of Pharaoh. They each dreamed a dream that bothered them. Joseph miraculously interpreted the dream of the 2 people from Pharaoh's court. Now, these divine appointments are examples of the supernatural working through the natural, the everyday events that kept God's plan in motion for the prescribed end that he had determined. And we know how the story ended. The person who was told that he would be back in Pharaoh's good graces in a few days forgot all about Joseph. You recall that? And then 2 years later, when Pharaoh had his 2 dreams, all of a sudden he remembered the miraculous thing that happened to him in prison, and Joseph was summoned into the presence of Pharaoh, where he interpreted the 2 dreams about the 7 years of plenty, the 7 years of famine, and that Pharaoh should basically prepare for that and have somebody be an overseer to make sure everything gets done right, because it's going to be very difficult for Egypt. And Pharaoh said, where can we find a better man? And Joseph, what a great story. He began the day as a prisoner in Egypt, and he ended the day second in command of all of Egypt. It's a great account. But here's the point. We should note, if any of these 9 divine appointments had not happened, then Joseph would not have found himself in a position to be brought before Pharaoh. In other words, each of these unrelated events had to take place to get him to the place where he would eventually see Pharaoh. All right, now we're going to look at some divine appointments in modern history that have set the stage for where we're at right now with last day's Bible prophecy. Mark Twain, the agnostic, goes to the Holy Land. He writes a book called The Innocents Abroad in 1867. His description of the Promised Land as a veritable wasteland strikes a responsive chord in the hearts of Jewish people all over the world. It has them realize the promise of the Lord, first of judgment on the land, because the land was a veritable wasteland, but also the promise would be that the land would be renewed someday. This book has been credited as having a major impact on the Jews, namely by giving them a desire to return to their promised land. In 2017, when I was doing breaking news, a program like this, it was an hour a day, 5 days a week from his channel. It was the 150th anniversary of the book, The Innocents Abroad, and I read a story about it, and I had no idea that what this book had meant to the people at the time, because Mark Twain, in describing how desolate the promised land was at the time, they didn't see one person on the whole route getting to Jerusalem. It was just a bunch of shrubs and nothing in the desert. And it just devastated the people, recognizing that the promised land that God had promised the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob was a wasteland. But they remembered the promise, or the God warning them about judgment. But he also promised them that someday there would be a renewal of the land. And that kind of got the ball rolling to get the desire in their hearts to come back to their ancient homeland. So this agnostic that wrote this, Mark Twain, is credited to a large degree of putting in the hearts of the people the idea of getting back to the promised land. Now, some years later in the 19th century, Theodor Herzl, an agnostic Jew, thought Jews should conform with Christians. He would actually encourage them to do this when he was a student in Vienna. Here's what Lance Lambert wrote in his book about this. There he would argue in debating societies that all Jews should take their place with Christian citizens in either the Austro-Hungarian Empire or in the German Reich as fellow citizens. He went on to say that if it meant getting christened or confirmed in either the Roman Catholic or the Lutheran Church, let us do so, but let us take our place beside our Gentile brethren. And then Lance Lambert continues to write, some of you may have heard of the famous speech he made about how he envisaged at one time an honorable mass conversion of the whole Jewish people in Central Europe. It would be in a great service at St. Stephen's Cathedral in Vienna with a solemn pealing of the bells midday on a Sunday. However, 2 events changed his life. First, one of his best friends, a brilliant Jew, shot himself because he could not find work anywhere as a Jew. This began to cause Dreyfus, Theodor Herzl, to rethink his position as a Jew. And next, what happened? He went to Paris as a reporter to cover the Dreyfus trial. Dreyfus was a Jewish captain in the French army who had been made a scapegoat for every kind of problem that the army was experiencing at the time. He was convicted and sentenced to life imprisonment at Devil's Island in the Caribbean, while he was obviously not guilty. Everybody knew he was not guilty, but he was sentenced anyway. Now, the thing that appalled Herzl the most, that was suddenly the people took to the streets and began to scream at the top of their lungs, "Death to the Jews! Death to the Jews!" Suddenly, Herzl realized that in a country as sophisticated and educated as France, if something like this could suddenly be engineered where people could take to the streets crying "Death to the Jews," what hope was there for the rest of Europe? So it was then, he said, a vision came to him. He said, so tremendous in what it said, it completely overpowered me. It was the vision of a reconstituted Jewish nation. Later in 1895, Herzl published a book called Der Judenstaat, or the Jewish State. He argued that the only way in which the Jewish problem can be resolved was by establishing a Jewish state in the Holy Land. Herzl's writings started the Jews on their way back to their promised land. Now get this one. This one always is thrilling to me. At the conclusion of the first Zionist Congress in Basel, Switzerland on September 3rd, 1897, Theodor Herzl made the following entry into his diary. In Basel, I founded the Jewish state. If I said this aloud, it would be greeted with worldwide derision. In 5 years, perhaps, and certainly in 50, everyone will see it. Herzl's entry into his diary turned out to be prophetic. The modern state of Israel would be founded about 50 years to the day after he made this statement, when in 1947, the United Nations voted to have two states, a Jewish state and an Arab state in the Promised Land. In other words, the preparation for the rebirth of the modern state of Israel. Therefore, two men who were agnostics were central in starting the ball rolling in the establishment of the modern state of Israel, some 1,800 years after the people were removed from their land in AD 70 by the Romans. How did this happen? Well, each unknowingly experienced a number of divine appointments. Now, this is a topic we could have so much more to say about. Indeed, as we look at our world today, the way it's constituted is a result of so many seemingly unrelated events that nobody paid much attention to at the time. However, the Lord was orchestrating all these things to bring the world to the place where we're at now and where we will be in the future. So please check out our book, 25 Signs. We're near the end, and you'll get an idea of the different events that have taken place historically that have set the stage for where we are now, waiting for the coming of Christ and the events associated with it. It's a free download from our website, Educating Our World, under the heading of Bible Prophecy. And so I think each of us needs to take some time and think about our own lives, our own history, certain events that took place where at the time we thought they were totally unrelated, may not mean much, but you start putting them all together and it brings us to the place where we're at right now. That's the way the Lord worked in the life of Joseph, in the life of Judah, in the life of Jonah, and the life of us, and in Theodor Herzl and Mark Twain, to bring the world where it's at right now here in 2024. And so what happened with Donald Trump was a supernatural act of God, that he just happened to turn at the right time so he would not be killed, because there's still plans for Donald Trump, for the United States of America, and for the future. What are they going to be? Well, we'll have to wait and see, won't we? All right, I'm Don Stewart. Thanks for watching. Until next time, as always, may the Lord richly, richly bless.